This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. I've been all about taking Browns fans out of their bubble all week, right? I've talked to Cincinnati Bengals people. I've talked to Pittsburgh Steelers people. I've talked to people who cover other teams in the AFC North. And now I finally have put my final gem in my affinity gauntlet, right? If we finally done closed the gauntlet like Thanos, we got Engraven here to talk about the Ravens. And the first thing I'll just start out, and I think I started out with this with everybody, is, isn't it insane when you think about it, how much continuity this division has had in the last 4 years, where it's not just the same coaching staffs that have been in place. Like, obviously, like, teams have switched out coordinators here and there, but it's still John, it's still Mike, it's still Kevin, it's still Zach, since 2020. And it's the same core of players almost since 2018, right? Like, we've been talking about Lamar, we've been talking about Miles, we've been talking about TJ, we've been talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick, we've been talking about how the Ravens are going to use Lamar, all of these things, the Ravens' consistent and perpetual wide receiver issues, all of those things. It feels like there's so much continuity in this division. It feels like we have talked about it all. And what a rare place that is to be, because, like, you just look at the constant turnover in the NFL, and then you look at the AFC North, and somehow the guy who's the two-time coach of the year is also the guy who has been with his team the least amount of time in the AFC North. In Kevin Stefanski.
Oh man, you know what? I never thought about that as far as continuity in the AFC North, and like you mentioned, the NFL is full of turnover. Literally not even every single year, really every single day. It's always somebody getting fired, somebody getting traded, somebody on the move. This coach resigning, moving on to other opportunities. Whatever it may be. But yeah, the core of the AFC North, it has really been intact for a while. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons that the AFC North, it continues to remain so competitive. Like last year, no team finishing under 500. And I know some records were close to 500, but still that's big. That's like significant because there was no loser in the division. There was no losing team in the division, and just the continued competitiveness of the AFC North between every team. Like, of course, there'll be some one-offs where you got to blow out here and there, but a lot of these games sometimes they can be what's the word I'm looking for? They can be splits. They could be splits. These games can be crazy, man. The one team could be down and out, and you could think, oh yeah, that's a wrap. They done. Their season is over. They ain't competing with this other team on top. Wrong. It's AFC North, man, so you just never know what's gonna go down. But yeah, continuity has been a part of why this remains so competitive.
Yeah. Now, speaking of continuity, let's talk about the Ravens. Had a big year last year, and then it ended in the way that it did. You, as somebody who watches this team, has watched them ramp up to this season the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the future in regards to how that game ended? Like, was that a type of loss that you take where you feel like you have to kind of do more than bring it back to get to where you want to get to? Or is this one where you're like, hey, we got to kind of reshuffle the decks a little bit because we couldn't get past Pat, and it didn't feel like, it felt like we got on. Like, how do you feel after that game? Because that was just such a weird AFC Championship game. Yeah. You had the Chiefs in Baltimore, and it felt like a lot of people feel like it was the best shot for Baltimore to get past Kansas City, and for it to kind of end that way. Morally, how does that kind of affect the morale of the fan base? And where they're at right now and where you're at right now?
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough because really throughout the entire season, we had as Ravens fans, we had so many different moments where we just felt like, oh yeah, yeah, this is the year for sure. Different stuff is just lining up so perfectly to where it just makes sense, like that the Ravens win it all. Watching some games where a lot of times in the past they normally would have lost, but watching them win those games, it was like, oh yeah, yeah, we got it. Number one seed. Oh yeah, we remember what happened last time we got number one seed, but not again. It ain't going down this year. People talked about rust heading into the playoffs because you know with the number one seed, you get the bye week, and in the first half of the game, the playoff game against the Texans, the score was 10-10. So we were like, oh man, what's going on here? But then the Ravens end up taking off in the second half. So we're like, all right, okay, cool. AFC Championship game is coming to the crib. Hey, this is it, man. Ravens had all these stars in the building. They had all these former players in the building for the AFC Championship game. It was a big party over in Baltimore, but the Kansas City Chiefs, they came and they ruined it. So the way that game has me and a lot of Ravens fans feeling is like, all right, what really needs to be done? And why do we keep going through the same thing over and over and over? Obviously, every single year, only one team can win the championship game. So I feel like sometimes playoff wins and losses, they can get kind of overemphasized a bit. Because if you ain't winning the Super Bowl, then I mean, it's 31 other teams that don't win the Super Bowl, but still, even in playoff wins and losses, you want to look at individual performances and then obviously the team performances too. And in that game, in that AFC Championship game, there were some moments in that game that really changed everything. Obviously, one of the biggest ones for the Baltimore Ravens was Zay Flowers. In the first quarter, Zay Flowers breaks off for a big touchdown throw from Lamar Jackson. It's a beautiful thing. It's like, all right, let's go, let's get it. But then that Zay Flowers fumble at the goal line. If he scores there, just holds the ball, runs to them, hey, we got a touchdown. Or at the worst case scenario, he's down at the goal line. But he obviously didn't. He fumbled and that changed the game. But then when you back up and look at it from just a team perspective, you look at the way that the game was run and really the lack of running in the game because the Baltimore Ravens, they ran with their running backs six times. Six times. The Chiefs had one of the top ranked pass defenses, one of the worst run defenses. And even just the previous week, even though the Chiefs did get the win, the Bills, they were having their way with them on the ground. So I know I was thinking, a lot of us Ravens fans were thinking, oh, yeah, oh, right, we the number one rushing team in the league. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got this. Oh yeah, we're gonna be straight, man. Our defense and our oh yeah, we got the Chiefs gonna make some plays now, but yeah, we're gonna be straight, but we obviously weren't. So we keep wondering like when are the Ravens going to get out of their own way? Obviously, credit to the Chiefs because they came in and did their thing, but it felt like the Ravens were just not being themselves, and that's been one frustrating part about being a Ravens fan. It's like throughout the regular season they will continue to be themselves. They'll execute their game plan. We know who they are. They show who they are. And then come playoff time, it's like they try to flip the script. And it's like, oh, like for what? Well, what's the reasoning in that? So this offseason, the signing of Derrick Henry, that's obviously been our biggest free agent acquisition this offseason. And Ravens have lost a lot more than they've gained this offseason, so they still got a whole lot of work to do. But with Derrick Henry, what we're hoping for is that Derrick Henry, he really changes the tune of the Baltimore Ravens, especially come playoff time. Like regular season, none of us are worried about the Ravens in the regular season. We figured like if Lamar Jackson is playing, they'll win a lot more games than they lose, and they'll make it to the playoffs. But in playoffs, that's where we are the most concerned, especially like really going against a team like the Chiefs, because it seems like there's this whole big brother, little brother type of thing, teacher to student type of thing with Andy Reid and John Harbaugh, because we've seen this before against the Chiefs, where the Ravens are just not themselves. And it's really it feels like it's a head coach versus head coach thing, but it feels like that trickles down to the team too. And they almost get intimidated. But you cannot do that especially against a team like the Chiefs, even though they are running the show right now. They are the new Patriots right now. You can't do stuff like that. So with Derrick Henry, with a signing like that, obviously he's been very, very productive. And I know you question how good Derrick Henry is going to be with the Baltimore Ravens. You made some valid points in your argument with that. But the thing with him, what I'm hoping for is again, regular season not a concern, but I'm hoping that his impact can be felt the most in the playoffs. And what I mean when I say that is with the Baltimore Ravens, especially in recent playoffs, they have not had a running back with that they're paying significant money to, that's healthy and available. So I feel like that has sort of made them feel like, all right, we ain't really got one of those guys like that, so we can get away from them. It ain't no big deal. Like their playoff running backs recently have been Gus Edwards, has been J.K. Dobbins over the years, Justice Hill, Mark Ingram back in 2019, but he had a high ankle sprain, so he wasn't really he was available in that game, but he wasn't healthy. So they haven't had a significant running back in the playoffs, so that makes it easier. When you're not paying somebody that big money, it makes it easier to be like, whatever about them. But now you pay Derrick Henry significant money, not crazy money, but you paid him significant money at the running back position. So what we're hoping is that he can actually get that opportunity in the playoffs. I know you talked about too, which is very true. Ravens do running back by committee, and with Derrick Henry, he's somebody that needs a lot of carries to really get going. He needs a lot of carries to really make his impact on the game. And we'll see if that still holds true with when he runs behind the Baltimore Ravens offensive line and whoever that offensive line ends up being, because we're missing a lot of pieces right now. But that's the biggest thing, man. We just wondering what's gonna be next come playoff time. How is this team going to finally advance to the Super Bowl? Because last year that was the best team that Lamar Jackson has ever had. That's the best team that our GM Eric DeCosta has ever assembled under Lamar Jackson, or even as a GM. That has been an amazing team. So realistically, expecting them to be as good as last year, no, we don't expect the team to be that good at all. But they do still have their core guys, like you mentioned earlier, about the AFC North as a whole. Obviously, you got Lamar Jackson, you got Roquan Smith, who I know you're a big fan of. We got we got Kyle Hamilton. So we got a lot of our core guys still in the building. But now is how will they take that next step? Not only in the AFC North, but just in the road to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I see between like that division round and the championship game is with running backs. You ran the ball 6 times in that championship game versus well over 30 that you did in the divisional round. Now I know like the lead and what the score of the game had a lot to do with that, but that game was close until like the fourth quarter with Houston. I think it kind of just got away from Houston at the end of it. Or at least in the first half, it was close. So it wasn't like a blowout all the way, and then they just ran the ball for the rest of the game. My whole thing with the Derrick Henry signing is, if you're going to tell me that Baltimore's big upgrade this year was getting a running back, me as somebody who watches the Browns and like thinks about the Ravens in the way that you have to think about it, I'm like, well, it changes nothing for me. Right, like they have had J.K. Dobbins, Keaton Mitchell, all these guys who are great running backs. Lamar Jackson has led the team in rushing yards for like since 2018 or something crazy like that. Like he's
just about every year.
Yeah, and like I think sometimes people think that you can change that, but I think Lamar leads the team in rushing yards because Lamar probably should lead the team in rushing yards because he's that special and dynamic of a runner. He's a really good passer now too, but he is still super special at that. And I wonder, like, he was a little bit hesitant to run a little in that Kansas City game. And and Derrick Henry can help you for sure, right? You're going to have more of a concentrated attack to running the ball. But I've been on Lamar's side with a lot of things when it comes throughout his career after the Kyler Murray comment. But I do worry, like, sometimes it does feel like he's trying to prove people wrong when he plays football, right? Yeah. Where there's these times where he's like, I'm being stubborn. I don't want to run because I don't want them to think that of me. Or, if somebody calls him out for being a running quarterback, he really makes it a point to throw as much as possible at times. And I wonder if that's something that's getting it. Because it used to happen with Myles Garrett, where Myles used to be so focused on like the sack number. It's ironic because he got the defensive player of the year on 13 sacks, which is not even close to his career high. But he used to be so like tight about that sack number. I mean, that's why the whole situation with Mason Rudolph happened with him in 2019, amongst other things, because of his frustration, because he didn't get a sack in that game, right? He was frustrated. And sometimes when players are like hanging on to that kind of thing, it does get overblown. People make it like a whole kind of narrative. And I wish people didn't overblow it so we could talk about it in the proper context. But I do think that there's something to that where it's like, hey, Lamar might want to prove it too much that he's not just a running quarterback, right? That he is these other things. But sometimes his will to prove that, like if he has a chance to choose between how he can beat the Chiefs, he doesn't want to beat the Chiefs with 112 rushing yards. He wants to do it by getting 300 yards. And I think that's why he was taking deep shot after deep shot in that game. And it really starts to trickle into how he's playing. It's like, you know what it felt like, Graven? You know when you playing somebody in Madden, you trying to prove a point? So like you're not doing the stuff that you would normally do that you like, hey man, I know I could get but you trying to like just show them how good you are at Madden. So you try to do all this extra stuff. And that's kind of like what that championship game felt like. I'm like, boy, they really didn't run the regular playbook at times. Or like Lamar decided not to do things. I'm like, if he playing the Browns in week 12 at 1 o'clock, he definitely gonna do that, right? Like, because he's not worried about how anybody's gonna react to how he beats the Browns or how he beats these other teams. But it seems to be when he gets those big matchups, he really does care about how it's perceived to some extent. I'm not saying that this dictates everything that he does, but I do worry about that with him being something that really can affect him. Also, when I look at the Ravens, I'm like, hey, if they just upgraded at running back, but they didn't really do much at wide receiver, they've lost Stephen Duvernay, who was a really good punt returner and gadget guy for y'all. It's what basically y'all brought back Aguilar, right? And no more Odell, so it's gonna be more of a focus on Bateman. I did not have great things to say about that wide receiver room last year. I don't think it got better. No, and I wonder, like, so you guys got away from Greg Roman to have more of that passing attack. But it seems like this offseason was more of a concerted push on the offensive side of the ball to go back to running it. Like, where are the Ravens at with where they want to be with this offense? Because I was kind of surprised that there wasn't more of a serious commitment at wide receiver, especially in the offseason where I thought a lot of guys were available. We've been talking about the Ravens getting that big body 50-50 ball guy forever. And you had multiple guys available. I mean, even Mike Williams, like whatever price range you wanted, you had these guys available. And it seems like, again, the Ravens were just not really that interested in the wide receiver position. Maybe they're going to draft somebody, but we also know what the Ravens' track record has been when it has been drafting as wide receivers, and it's left something to be wanted. So, like, how do you feel about that whole aspect of the game, given, you know, some of these things that pop up with Lamar and this wide receiving room?
Yeah, well, to go back to your point about Lamar Jackson playing Prove It Ball, that's been something that we've talked about over the years at times, because we've seen it in different cases to where it's like we're watching a game and there's a wide open lane. Lamar's holding the ball looking for a receiver. And obviously, he's a quarterback. That's what he does. But we're yelling like, Lamar, run, take off, go, 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 go. But he just won't. He'll wait and wait and wait for a receiver to come open. And we'll be watching that and be a bit frustrated because it's like, hey, look, we want it to be to the point in the playoffs. Because, again, like you mentioned, in the regular season, it happens more often than not. But we wanted to get to the point in the playoffs, in those big games in the playoffs too, where he's just really willing to do whatever it takes to win. Because at the beginning and end of the day, that's really all that matters, is that you win. Because, say, for instance, in the AFC Championship game, He ran for 120 yards and threw for 175. And the Ravens won the game. People, of course, will critique that. They say, oh, he ran for all those yards. He ain't really passed for many yards. But at the end of the day, if he won the game, he would have been in the Super Bowl. And then if the same thing happened in the Super Bowl and they won, then people could critique, oh, he only passed for this amount of yards. But if they were Super Bowl champions, then nobody can ever take that away from you. So we're hoping that Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens can get to that point where they're not playing prove it ball. They're not trying to prove a point, trying to shut up the haters, anything like that. We're hoping that they get to that point where they just play their game, do their thing, and just win this offseason for sure. And I loved the Baltimore Ravens commitment to the wide receivers last offseason. It started off a bit shaky because I remember the first wide receiver signing was Nelson Aguilar, and I was thinking, oh man, as a Ravens fan, this is
Turned
probably
out to
going
be
to
the
be
best
the
one.
big move, huh?
It turned out to be one of their better signings.
It did. It did. It did. But I was thinking, like, as a Raven fan, this is gonna be their big signing. This is gonna be the
Mm.
one. But then they did, of course, sign Odell Beckham Jr. and it was obviously an overpay, and it was an overpay. We said this before the season even started. As soon as they signed Odell Beckham Jr., we saw the money. We knew they overpaid Odell Beckham Jr. Somebody who hadn't played football in a year, somebody who's dealt with a lot of injuries. And he can still play. He's not the same player, obviously, and he was not on the field for a lot of their games. Like he wasn't on the field that much in a lot of their games. But they had to overpay Odell Beckham Jr. for two different reasons. One, to get Lamar Jackson under contract because he requested Odell Beckham Jr. and DeAndre Hopkins. But then, even on top of that, because they didn't win the Super Bowl. But anyway, this year, wide receiver, yeah, lost Odell Beckham Jr. Devin Duvernay, he's out of there. So Ravens right now, their top receivers are Zay Flowers, who did his thing last year. He was nice last year. And as far as the gadget plays, like Devin Duvernay, that he used to for sure be that guy. I always call him the jet sweep king because the Ravens would use him like crazy with those jet sweeps. But last year, they took those opportunities and they gave them to Zay Flowers because Zay Flowers was all over those jet sweeps last year like crazy. But he obviously also had a lot of opportunities at the wide receiver position. And Devin Duvernay, he just simply hasn't. So Zay Flowers, I got no worries about him at all. Rashad Bateman, that is an interesting one. And if you ask five different Ravens fans about Rashad Bateman, I guarantee you will probably get five different answers on how people feel about him. Well, Rashad Bateman, potential is there. We haven't seen the potential reach yet, obviously. This is a big offseason for him and the Ravens because they get to decide whether they're going to pick up his fifth-year option or not. And as you know, just because a team picks up or declines a fifth-year option, it's not the end-all be-all. The team could pick up a fifth-year option and that player could still leave in free agency. A team could decline a fifth-year option and that player could still get a contract extension. But with Rashad Bateman, him and Lamar just have not been on the same page yet. So we're hoping that this is the offseason where they can get on the same page. Now, with wide receivers, the Baltimore Ravens had recently brought in Michael Gallup, former Dallas Cowboy, for a visit, and Josh Reynolds, former Detroit Lion, who just signed with the Broncos about a week ago. They had brought him in for a visit prior. That is sort of letting us know that the Ravens, they want to do something at the wide receiver position. They're not going to go into the season with the guys who they got now. So I still think that they are going to add a receiver of some significance via trade. But really, only time is going to tell. But I don't think it's just going to be Zay Flowers and Nelson Aguilar and Rashad Bateman and Tylan Wallace. And even when you throw Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely in there, I don't think they're just going to go into the season with those guys. But we're waiting to see what it's going to be, whether it's going to be through the draft or via trade or via free agency. Again, I think it'll be a mix of trade and draft. But yeah, we'll see in about a month because we obviously got the draft coming up at the end of this month. And the Ravens, they have had for the most part, a very quiet off season. And it's like it left a lot of fans wondering, like, well, hey, what are we doing? What's going on? All these teams out here making moves. Ravens lost 3 out of their 5 starting offensive linemen. They lost John Simpson to the Jets. They traded Morgan Moses to the
Mm,
Jets. Lost Kevin Zeitler to the Lions, and those guys were all starters. You did resign or you restructured Ronnie Stanley's contract, and he's been hurt a lot, but this is his last year under contract for the Baltimore Ravens. Next year, he'll be a free agent. And then they have Tyler Linderbaum, their starting center. So at 3 out of 5 spots on the offensive line, we don't know who the Ravens starters are going to be at all. And with a month before the draft, it's like, oh, okay. I know it's not going to all be rookies. Obviously, they're not going to go into a year with 3 out of the 5 spots on the offensive line, rookies starting. So we'll see what they do there. But back to the wide receivers, we're just waiting to see what the move is going to be
mm.
because we know there is going to be a move there for sure.
All right, let's talk about this defense. I think the story of the Ravens this offseason is the big names that you see on the broadcast, right? That are like, oh, these are the Ravens' key players. I don't think those names have changed much.
No.
But I think a lot of those like supporting names
Right.
have left, right? You talked about the offensive line, talked about some of that, like you're waiting for something to happen at wide receiver. Tight end, you still got the big headliner in Mark Andrews, and I don't think since you guys had like not Dennis Pitta, there was somebody before that. Well, Hunter Henry,
Ed Dixon.
yeah,
He was there before. Oh, Todd Heap, the big guy, Todd Heap.
yeah.
Yeah.
So y'all have always had tight end down
Oh
as a
yeah. And Shannon
franchise.
Sharp too.
And you brought in Derrick Henry as another name that you could add to the top of the marquee. But then I look at some of these like things that got switched out. I'm like, oh, losing Pat Queen for reasons I don't think a lot of people anticipate is a big deal. And look, I've had my fill of like fun with the whole Roquan thing. But the thing about that Ravens defense is they do ask whoever is that Will/Sam linebacker to also be a significant contributor into their edge rush, right? They also lost Jadeveon Clowney and like Pat Queen, Clowney. Those are two very important pieces to the TJ McDonald pass rush program. We talked about this. We used to joke about this with Sonny all the time, where they're going to rush by committee, and that is a huge part of the committee. Now, obviously, Kyle Hamilton factors in there. You drafted Trenton Simpson, so you hope that he could step in and do a Pat Queen type thing, but also, like, remember how long it took Pat Queen to even get to the point where it took him like 3 years to get to that point. So, you know, you still got Roquan, right? You brought back Justin Matabuke. You have Marlon Humphrey still there. And Brandon Stevens is still there on the contract. So like you got your corner situation somewhat figured out. But it's kind of that small stuff in between where I'm like, when they like to send those extra numbers, are they going to be as effective? Right? And is that going to allow Justin Matabuke to have the type of season that he had last year when Pat Queen, like teams were rotating packages basically to get Pat Queen off or to make sure that Kyle doesn't run free. Like if that's not as easy to manufacture anymore, how much does that change for the defense? So, you know, just those kind of changes, losing Pat Queen, do you feel like we know this defense is going to be good? Do you think they're going to be able to kind of hit the same highs that they hit last year with these losses that they've had? Or do you think that they have everything it takes to reload at those positions?
This is one of the reasons why we were so frustrated when the Ravens didn't win it all last year, because we knew that they were going to go under so many significant changes all across the entire team, not just when it comes to the players, but to coaching staff as well. The defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, who you mentioned, he ended up taking a head coaching job with the Seattle Seahawks. So now the Baltimore Ravens' new defensive coordinator is going to be former Ravens linebacker Zach Orr. Now, this will be his first time being a defensive coordinator, so we don't know exactly what he's going to bring, but I would expect that he would continue doing a lot of what Mike McDonald did and maybe put his own spin on it here and there, but hopefully he just continues to not try to fix what wasn't broken with a really good defense. Now, yeah, with Justin Madubuike, I could see his numbers, his statistics sort of going down a bit, especially with all the attention that he is going to command. Hopefully they don't, but I can see them doing that. And that won't necessarily mean that he would be having a bad season, but I just think he'll be just commanding more attention. Jadeveon Clowney, that was, in my opinion, the biggest loss that the Baltimore Ravens have suffered this offseason on the defensive side of the ball. He was a big contributor to the run defense, to the pass rush. He had 9.5 sacks, and he probably missed about 10 sacks. And it's like, man, because there would be a lot of times he would get right back there to the quarterback and would try to grab him, and would just the quarterback would end up slipping away. So he missed a lot of sacks and still got 9.5. But I was hoping that he could return. Kyle Vanoy, he came in and I think he had maybe 7.5, 8 sacks. So like you mentioned a lot, and Patrick Queen, that is a big loss for the Ravens as well. Ronald Darby, who came in. Marlon Humphrey was hurt early. Marlon Humphrey was really hurt throughout the entire season. But Ronald Darby, somebody who came in and played well in Marlon Humphrey's absence. Rock Yassin, it didn't work out with him. But anyway, yeah, a lot of the supporting cast, like you mentioned, they are gone. So Ravens are going to have to. Geno Stone, he was another one.
Oh yeah, the AFC
Marcus
North
Williams
just went through your safety room, right? Because
Yeah,
Geno Stone.
they really did. So it's frustrating. So Geno Stone, we're gonna see him twice a year. Patrick Queen with the Steelers, gonna see him twice a year. So yeah, we lost a lot of guys, man. Lost a whole lot of guys. Again, that's what made it so frustrating how last season ended. So Ravens got a tough job, because we talked about earlier how, like, we're on the offensive side of the ball, how 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen gone, starting offensive linemen gone. So Ravens got to fill in those gaps. So you got to take care of that. But then on the defensive side of the ball, your depth got hit up like crazy. So now on the defensive side of the ball, while you do got most of your core guys intact for the most part, getting that depth that's going to be a mission in itself. So Eric DeCosta, tough job, tough assignment. But last year was the first year for me that Eric DeCosta really earned my trust. He's been our general manager since 2019, because Hollywood Brown was his first draft pick. So he's been the general manager since 2019. But last year was the first year where I was like, oh yeah, I trust Eric DeCosta, because to see how he built the Baltimore Ravens roster last year, to see how he assembled it, to see how there was such quality as starters, and then there was a lot of quality at depth pieces as well. I trust that he's gonna put them in another good position to have a good roster. We're being extra patient this offseason, because it's been really slow, because he ain't done too much yet, and we lost a lot of people. But we're just being patient with it and seeing how it all pans out.
Definitely. Well, Engraven, thank you for coming on, giving us that inside information. I will pass that on to Andrew Berry because we would love to beat the Ravens 2 times a year. I don't know when the last time we did that. I don't think we sweat y'all in a while. Y'all swept us in 2020 though. So yeah, I'm gonna pass that information on to Kevin and Andrew when I get the first chance on. But always a good time having you on. Sure, make sure you check out Engraven, youtube.com/Engraven videos. Y'all know who it is, man. Team Keep It Clean. You almost at like 75 subscribers, 75K?
75,000.
Woo! We gonna put that plaque, man.
One day, man. One day.
But definitely always a good time to have you on, man. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.